Music fans in Minnesota and around the world were saddened by the recent passing of Grant Hart from liver cancer at the age of 56. Hart was a beloved drummer, singer, songwriter, and all-around character who first burst into the collective music consciousness in the early 80s with the highly influential band Husker Du. Once the group split up, Hart stayed busy, first with the band Nova Mob and then as a solo artist, releasing several well-received albums over the years. As a decades-long friend of Grant's, Soul Asylum's Dave Pirner had a unique perspective of the man. He was kind enough to share some of his thoughts and recollections about the late, great Grant Hart. How has the process been for you dealing with Grant's passing?
Well, I think that I'm very thankful that I ran into him a few times recently. And, the first time I saw him in a little while was at a Patti Smith concert. And then I saw him at a Meat Puppet show. And then I saw him at a sort of surprise tribute to himself. And all three environments were environments that he was like a fixture of. I mean, the Meat Puppets thing, it was like Mike Watt from the Minutemen was in the dressing room, and Greg Norton was back there, and it just felt very normal. We did a lot of touring with Husker Du back in the day when we were coming up, and in a way, I'm indebted to Grant. I mean, he helped me out with a lot of sort of artwork for our first single. I was doing the artwork for it, and he just took it and he went, "Let me see if I can tighten that up for you." And he just kind of tweaked it for me, and he was very, very giving and very open and very, I don't know, he had a sort of a legendary kindness and sense of humor that was, I can't explain it in any way other than born of sort of punk rock. It was this very, a sort of music thing that I came out of that had a lot to do with being creative. He was always making something, and being very open about how you felt about whatever it was that was on your mind, and that always freed up the person that he was talking to feel like they could say whatever they wanted to say, and it always made for great conversation. It seems like every time I was talking to Grant, we were trying to make each other laugh, or talk about things that had something to do with the arts, and he had an astonishing sense of history, which was, even at the Patti Smith show, he kind of went into this sort of historical thread that, I wish I could remember what it was about. It could have been about airplanes in World War II, or it could have been about atomic submarines, or it could have been about anything, but he just kind of started talking about it, and you could see his train of memory and history was extremely accurate, as far as I can tell. And I have heard, somebody recently told me that they were all sitting somewhere, and Grant started into this big story about what they were looking at. It was a field or something. He said, they had the Battle of such and so here. And he spun a yarn for about 20 minutes, and then he went, I'm just kidding. So, dealing with that, too. I mean, it was just I don't even remember what the question is. I have so many great memories of hanging out with Grant. And, when I went on tour as a drummer for the first time, he gave me one of his favorite snare drums. He said, "Take this. It'll do you some good." And it was, in fact, a great snare drum. I think the question was kind of how has it been since he's passed? And I guess the initial reaction was probably more shocking than it should have been, because, his people that were close to him knew that he was really, really sick, and he didn't talk about it. And I tried to ask about it once or twice, and then you sort of end up asking who he's with, like how's he doing, and it happened a lot sooner than I thought it would, and that part of it got weird. I mean, I got a call from Lori Barbero at I think about 2:00 in the morning, and she gave me the news, and it was very Minneapolis sort of people that are, I don't know what, connected through this whole punk rock thing, and it was just really kind of her to call, and we talked, and you know, she was kind of there for me when Carl Mueller died, so I mean, I saw Grant in the parking lot after Carl, my bass player, died, and I said, you guys should really get back together. Who's produced should get back together, because my bass player just died, and you guys are all still alive. And, you know, I'll never forget that conversation. It was just strange. And the night that Soul Asylum was practicing, we actually jammed for 55 minutes, which Soul Asylum has never, ever done, like ever, in 30-some years. And it just kept going on, and we're soloing, and we kind of placed that as right around, while we were doing this experimentation in the practice phase, which is very rare for us, was right around the time that Grant passed.
Dave, you mentioned that he had a kind of a sense of history, and I'm wondering, did he have perspective on his own place in music history, or where he fit into that? Did he get a sense of that, do you think?
I hope so, because I kind of went through that, I guess, I suppose, and I think that, you know, I read an interesting quote in the City Pages. It was like Prince was of Minneapolis, but Grant was from Minneapolis, which I'm not sure if I know what that means, but I'm sorry, I've just got so many memories on my mind. What am I talking about?
No, that's
again?
quite all right. You were just talking about how he sort of had an idea and a sense of history, and I'm wondering if he had...
Yeah, and I thought, my God, you know, he's like a legendary figure. I mean, he has that sort of mythical quality to him that, you know, some of the stories you might hear don't even seem real, or some of this kind of, the amount of talent he has doesn't seem real. And his place in the history of punk rock, I want to think that deep down inside him somewhere, he understood how important and pivotal he was to the entire movement. I don't know if he thought that way so much. I mean, there was definitely times where Grant was more confident than other times. So, you know, when they first got signed to Warner Brothers, he was kind of flying high. But he never really pursued it in a way that was full of self-importance and self-aggrandizement. I don't know if enough people got a chance to reassure him that whatever his contribution to rock music is incredibly significant, if you ask me. So, you know, I really hope so. You know, I hope he felt loved, because he was certainly loved by so many people in so many places, you know. I mean, Patti Smith walks into the room and they're like old friends, and it goes on and on like that through the early days of the do-it-yourself punk rock thing. And, you know, he blessed a lot of people with his presence along the way, and I think a lot of people looked up to him in a way that he would probably shirk off that sort of responsibility. But yeah, I can only hope that he felt like he got a lot accomplished.
You talked a little bit about Carl's passing, and I was fortunate enough to be at the benefit show for Carl a number of years ago and saw Grant play with Bob. I'm wondering if you have any particular memories of of that night, which I imagine must have been an incredibly emotional night for you, and there was so much going on. But I'm just wondering if you have any particular memories of Grant and Bob on that particular evening.
I do. And Paul Westerberg showed up and played great, and I hadn't seen him in a while. And Bob and Grant got back together for the first time since I could remember. And I saw funny looks between the two of them on stage, which I had seen before, which were not friendly looks. But after the gig, they were both just standing next to each other talking, and I just looked at them standing together, and I was just like, this is how I want to see you guys talking and standing together. And I just gave them both a huge hug, and I was very overwhelmed with the outpouring of support for Carl. And again, I was in a situation where I just thought, this isn't really happening. Some miracle cure is going to fall from the sky, and Carl's going to make it. But look at all the love in this room. It was very, very touching. And I remember Westerberg's quote in the paper a few days later, which is so Paul Westerberg, and I just thought it was funny. He said, well, I just did it because I hoped maybe somebody does it for me sometime. I don't know why I think that's indicative of his sense of humor, and maybe he wasn't even trying to be funny. But yeah, I mean, it was the disparity between Bob's personality and Grant's personality is far and wide. So I was very happy to find out that, they got to hang out recently, which I did not know until somebody just told me the other day. And, they were just a kind of perfect yin and yang, which can be a perfect storm sometime, but they just had it going on as far as one guy being kind of crazy and creative and all over the place, and the other guy being very focused and having a business sense and almost kind of Zen-like quality of control, I guess. So that was a special night.
I'm curious, Dave, have you had a chance to, or have you taken the opportunity to listen to Grant's music since he passed, and has that done anything for you in a helpful way, or to sort of deal with what has happened?
Well, when I was thinking about putting together this kind of compilation thing, I just went, well, let me see, what would I put on it? And I came up with 12 songs off the top of my head so quickly, I was stunned. I was like, God, I know so much of his material, and it's so good. And over the course of playing the tribute gig at the Hook and Ladder, where Grant came on stage with us, and I went, holy shit, we're playing a tribute to Grant. And here he is. Why don't you sing it, Grant? It was great. We listened to a lot of Grant's stuff. And I recently, this is what a Luddite I am, I recently discovered YouTube. And that was kind of a coincidence. I was like, I wonder what happens when it's on my TV, not on my computer. And I didn't even know I had it. I was like, I wonder what happens if I write in Grant Hart. And lo and behold, there was just a whole bunch of stuff that just kind of whatever. It took me down memory lane, but not really, which was really good. It wasn't a bunch of nostalgia about Husker Du. It was more about things that Grant had been doing on his own since then. It was very up to date. It was right up to he's playing a song at the Current he's saying "radiate" over and over again in the chorus, and I'm like, is he talking about radiation? I mean, it was very chilling.
Right.
So, have I done that thing that's going to happen? Not yet. So there will be 2 or 3 close friends of Grant at my house at some point or another, and I will pull every single one of my vinyl records out, and I do believe I have, every single Husker Du album and Grant solo stuff. And we'll probably do that at some point. But yeah, it's pretty firmly ingrained in me. And it's kind of like when I think about his songs with Husker Du, I see him drumming while he's singing, and I probably watched him do it many, many, many times. And, I often think about the first few times I saw them in the 7th Street entry and what a shock it was. And I was just thinking about the first time I ever saw them. They were opening up for Chris Osgood's group, Speed Wiener. And Chris had been teaching me some things on the guitar, and I walked in and Bob Moe was playing the purple Mosrite guitar that I was worshiping at the guitar shop. I was like, oh, that is the coolest guitar. I really want to buy that guitar. I don't have enough money, but it's like a Mosrite. It's like a Ventures surfing guitar. And I walked in and Bob was playing, and I was like, it was a mixed reaction of, God damn it, and okay, well, that means it's definitely a cool guitar. But they were a little bit different that night because it was before, it was like when their first single came out, which was Statues. And not long thereafter, they went into this thing where it turned into hardcore punk rock, and it was very, very, very hard and very fast and shockingly almost comical in the way that it was aggressive. And that was, I guess, that was the next phase of their career, and they were only a year and a half into it or something.
Do you remember the first time you met Grant?
The first time Soul Asylum ever played, he was there. And that was the first time I met him. And I didn't know who he was, and he was just like he's always been ever since then. I mean, he seemed like he was a fixture, and everybody kind of, people knew him, and he was very forthcoming, and I got to know him. And I honestly don't, I think I knew he was in Husker Du at the time, but he had a presence that was very, he just stood out as far as maybe the reverence that was going on around him that he didn't notice or whatever, but these are very 1981 or something, very early times, and he was there, which goes to show me how much he, I don't know, had his ear to the ground or something.
Well, that's why I wanted to ask you about that, because that's one of the things that I saw come up again and again since his passing, and even before that, I think that people would talk all the time about how, everybody sort of has a story about him or running into him or seeing him somewhere. It's almost like he was everywhere at once for a really long time. What was it about him that that made him the person that everybody had a story about? Do you know?
Well, it was kind of his unstoppable sense of I want to say wanting to entertain people. It's not really the expression that I'm looking for, but he had an incredible sense of almost like old-fashioned, like vaudevillian kind of thing going on, where he was always ready to try to make you laugh or tell you something you didn't know, or do something amusing, or whatever. Maybe that's what it was. Maybe he's just trying to make a memorable experience for everyone who meets him, because it almost seems that way, Here's something you never thought about before, or, here's something I'm going to make fun of that, everyone else is afraid to make fun of, or whatever. I don't know. But, yeah, probably pretty good at reading his audience, no matter who he was talking to, and pushing a button if a button needed to be pushed. He'd have this way of he'd stare off into space for a split second and then come back with some anecdote that he figured whoever he was talking to might appreciate. which is a pretty uncanny ability, actually.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think that he was always on, which is what I told my press person. He didn't let an opportunity pass to meet somebody and try to make them laugh or charm them or tell them a story or try to teach them a lesson, for lack of a better expression, give you some unwarranted opinion about something that is a Grant opinion. It's a strong opinion. So, there was always something inside of him that wanted to, I think, make an impression, and a positive impression.
Well, he certainly did that, and you've been very generous with your time, Dave. I really appreciate that. Is there anything else you wanted to add about Grant as we wrap things up here?
No, just that, I mean, I really loved him, and he was really loved, and if that's the bittersweet fruit that he will take with him, I hope he knew it.
Jimmy gave us a number, and Jerry gave us a place to stay, and Billy got a